How is it going, everyone? I hope you're having a lovely day. In today's episode, I would love to share with you the pattern and tutorial for this quilt that I just finished. So I like to bring to you new quilt pattern and tutorial every once a month at least. The reason it's only once a month because obviously quilting is very labor intensive. It takes time from the designing process up to finishing and binding the quilt. Though I enjoyed the whole experience. I call this quilt the Octagon Quilt because obviously this quilt is formed out of blocks that has the shape of octagon. So each of these blocks is actually formed out of 4 half square triangles, and the rest of the patches are the 3-inch squares. So this is, I would say this is simple but takes a lot of work as well. So the finished measurement of this quilt is 60.5 by 60.5 inch. So I made this quilt to be square. Of course you can adapt and change the dimension of this quilt simply by reducing the number of the blocks. So for this project we're gonna work with charm packs and fat quarters. So you will need 64 pieces of charm packs, each from prints and solid, and you will also need 7 fat quarters. Of course, quilt batting and quilt backing as well. So I will put the list of all supplies that you will need on the description box down below. And also download the diagram of this quilt. I will also have that link in the description box below. Alright, so enough of me talking. Let's get started to our tutorial. Prepare your charm packs or the 5-inch squares. You're gonna need 64 prints and 64 light solid. You can use white or off-white color. First, we're gonna make the half square triangles. Take one of your solid charm pack and one of your print charm pack and lay them right side together. Then sew all around with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Once you've done that, you want to cut this piece on both diagonal angles, and this will give you 4 half square triangles. Then go ahead and press the seams open. You want to press the seams towards the print fabric. Trim those bunny ears off. Then you're going to square up each of these half square triangles to be 3-inch square. So take your square ruler and find that 3-inch point. Then you want to line that up on your half square triangle. And if you notice there is like 1/8 of an inch of extra fabric on both corners. Now go ahead and trim that off. So you want to do the same with all of your half square triangle pieces. So you want to go on and continue with the rest of your charm packs, which will give you 256 pieces of half square triangles. Next we're going to cut the 3-inch squares. So take your fat quarter and fold that in half widthwise. Then take your ruler and rotary cutter. First we're going to straighten up the edges here. Then you want to measure in 3-inch and cut. Then you want to do the same until you got 7 pieces of 3-inch strips. Then you want to stack all of these strips. I'm stacking all of the 7 strips here, but you can do 2 batches if you prefer that. Straighten up the edges first, then measure in 3-inch and cut. And then you want to repeat the same 5 more times. So you should end up with about 42 pieces of 3-inch squares out of 1 fat quarter. Alright, so here I've got all of my pieces cut. So I've already cut 7 fat quarters, and for the white solid you will need to cut 64 pieces of 3-inch square. So you will need about half a yard of fabric for this. To piece the block, you're gonna start off with the white square. Then you want to take 4 identical prints and put them on all 4 sides of the white square. Then you want to take 4 identical half square triangles and lay them on the corners with the white color facing out, just like so. Alright, so now we're going to start piecing this together. So I'm going to start from the first row here. Of course, we're going to sew this with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Since we are going to sew from the edge where the seam of the half square triangle is, I'm going to use a scrap of fabric that I folded twice and lay that at the back of my presser foot to prevent the needle from bunching up. Now go ahead and give this a quick press, and you want to press the seams towards the center. Now we're going to work on the middle row. Then you want to press the seams towards the sides. Then we're going to work on the last row. Next, we're going to sew the first row and the second row together. And of course, you want to match the seams or nest it together. You may use some pins if necessary. Then go ahead and sew with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Then you want to go ahead and press the seams away from the center. And voila, your first block is done. You will need to make in total 64 blocks. So it will be a lot of sewing, so take your time and have fun. So once you've got all your 64 blocks sewn together, go ahead and arrange them in 8 rows. Each row will have 8 blocks. Now we're going to group each of the row. So here I've got 8 of my rows already clustered together. You wanna label each of the rows, so take a little sticker or post-it note just to make sure that you won't get confused when you started sewing. Then go ahead and start sewing each of these rows. I'm gonna start from, of course, the first row. So I'm gonna take the first block and the second block and lay them right side together. And of course you want to match the seams and use a pin or 2 if necessary. Then go ahead and sew with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Alright, so the first and the second block already sewn. Now go ahead and take the third block and do the same. So a little trick here to matching the seams. If you see both of the seams of these 2 blocks that I'm going to sew together are facing on the same direction, and of course this will create extra bulk when you sew this together. So what you can do instead, you can simply rotate your block, and if you notice the seams on the other side should be facing the opposite direction, and this way it's easier for you to nest the seams. And if your fabric has that directional print, it may not be possible for you to rotate your block. So just simply fold the seams of the other block to the opposite side. And of course, use a pin to secure this in place. And that should work as well. Alright, now you want to continue on and sew until you've got all the rows sewn together. Once you've done sewing, go ahead and press the seams. You want to alternate the direction of your seams. So if you press the seams of the first row towards the left, then you want to press the seams of your second row towards the right. This will make it easier for you to nest the seams later when you start sewing these rows together. Alright, so here I've got all of my blocks on each row sewn together. Next we're going to sew the first row and the second row together, and then the third row and the fourth row together, and the fifth row and the sixth row together, and the seventh and the eighth row together. So let's get started with the first and the second row. Sew this with 1/4 inch of seam allowance, and of course you want to nest the seams. I'm nesting the seam as I go, but you can also use pins ahead of time if that's going to make your life a lot easier. And obviously this video has been sped up during the editing, not to bore you, but in real I actually really took my time and not to rush this whole process. Alright, so here I've got my quilt top already sewn. Next we're going to sandwich this with the quilt batting and quilt backing. So here I've already sandwiched my quilt top with the quilt backing and the quilt batting. You will need about 2 yards of quilt backing. And I'm going to baste this quilt with basting spray. You can also use basting pin or combination, whichever method that you are more comfortable with. To start, I'm going to pull my quilt batting and my quilt top halfway where I got only the backing fabric, just like shown here. And I'm going to spray this section with spray basting. You do not need too much though. I only use very sparingly. And I want to take my batting and lay that back on top of the backing fabric and smooth everything out. And I'm going to iron this on low setting just to make sure that there is no wrinkle or pleats. You also want to check sometimes just to make sure that your backing has no pleats that tend to get created when you use basting spray. So just take your time and make sure that everything is smooth. Now I'm going to spray my basting on top of this batting. Then I'm gonna lay the quilt top back on the batting. And I'm gonna iron that as well. So I already got half of the section basted. Now I'm going to work the same for the other half. And once you've done basting your quilt, of course it's time to quilt this. So for this project I did the free motion quilting, and I combined the stippling and some loops as well. I used the Aurifil thread in light beige color. This thread is just so amazing for free motion quilting. Of course guys, you don't have to do free motion. If you like quilting with walking foot, go ahead and do that. Or if you like hand quilting, you can also do that as well. And just have fun with your project and enjoy the whole experience of quilting. Alright, so once you're done machine quilting, go ahead and bind your quilt. Use whatever binding method that you like. You can do machine binding, you can do hand binding. I finish mine with my usual favorite, which is with decorative stitches. It's kind of like a shortcut binding method. If you want to have a look on that, I have actually posted the separate tutorial for this type of binding method, so I will link that down below in the description box as well, so you can have a look for your reference. And that's all I have for you today guys. Thumbs up if you like this tutorial, and I shall see you next time with another fun sewing and quilting project. Goodbye!